Everybody's still enjoying the fellowship and conversations, which is great. I'll be looking for my partner in crime here momentarily. I'm going to have to let him know that someone has absconded with our chairs or our stools, so he's going to have to tough it out. Beautiful day outside. I know that's already been mentioned. Oh, they hit him on that side this time. Oh, okay. Got it? Thank you. We may only need one if he doesn't come on pretty soon. Thank you. It is a beautiful day outside. It's hard to figure, the clocks have gone back an hour, and yet the temperature, I think, is supposed to be in the 80s this week. And of course, I was having that conversation with someone a couple of minutes ago. It was like, well, we're going to have the bees and the wasps will be back out, and then probably a couple of days after that, the high will be around 30 or something, and then everything will disappear again. He is making his way here. By the way, Les, the only coffee that's left is decaf. I don't know if you want to grab any or not, but that's...
Yes, I do.
Okay, well, maybe there's still some there, so you can try.
All right, I want to run over there. Be right back.
No worries.
Don't do the good stuff yet.
Okay, we'll just keep talking about you. So, but it is the weather in this part of the world and this state is among the most interesting there is. It can be 80 degrees one day, 40 degrees the next. You can have snow, and then after snow, it can be 60 degrees the following day. So you never know. You don't get bored with the weather anyway. As Les is making his way back, we'll just go ahead and introduce a little bit and do a little bit of revision from last week. Walking on the water, of course, our lessons continue with Simon Peter, some of the examples of his life, some of the things that he did, some of the things that we can learn from. Was it empty? Oh, man, I'm sorry.
Why are you moving yours?
Well, just to be on the safe side.
Okay.
I didn't want it to spill on you.
Thank you.
You know why we keep running out of coffee?
We don't make enough.
Well, no, I think we make enough. Have you ever noticed people that bring their own coffee in, and they come in with these big cups, and then after they finish theirs, they fill up their cup again? Yeah. That's why you run out of coffee.
Well, I've been told we're running out of coffee because halfway through my lesson, to stay awake, they have to go get another cup.
Well, that's a legitimate concern.
All right.
So, anyway.
Thanks for filling in last week. We got away. Jen and I got away for 3 days to Fall Creek Falls with some of them from class over here. There was several of us that went off to Fall Creek Falls and rode bicycles and enjoyed nature and worshiped together. And so
I can tell you've been riding a bicycle.
It's because I'm breathing heavy.
And now you look much more svelte.
All right. Okay, let's jump into the text. I'm not even sure what that word means. I know you went through this. I did want to go back and just touch on it for a moment. This is one of those odd texts in Matthew's gospel that's not found in Mark, it's not found in Luke, it's not found in John. And I remember years ago I came across it, and that caused me to ask a very simple question: why? Again, if you're not familiar with the three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, these are called the Synoptic Gospels. And studies have shown that these Gospels somehow were connected to one another. And the typical belief, and it's the one that I hold, it's the one I believe to be, in fact, I believe I can prove it, is that Mark was written first and that Mark was Peter's gospel. The church, all the church fathers says that Mark wrote down Peter's memories. And so I think Mark's gospel is actually Peter's gospel and was recognized in the early church as Peter's gospel. Matthew starts to write his gospel, and knowing that Peter's gospel was already written, he takes Peter's gospel and simply expands it. 97% of Mark is repeated in Matthew. I want you to think about that. 97%. And you go, wow. Yeah, that's why if you're reading Matthew in your yearly Bible reading, and then you get to Mark and you go, haven't I read this before? Yes, because Mark took it and expanded it. Matthew took it and expanded it. And then Luke does the same thing. He takes it and expands Mark's gospel for a Gentile. Matthew did it for Jews. Jewish Christians, but Jews. And so I began to ask, why is that text in there? We could go to the next one there. Look at verse 27. But so that we may not cause offense. He basically had asked Peter, who do men collect taxes from? Do they collect them from their own children? The answer is no. He being the Son of God, therefore didn't need to pay the temple tax. But in order that you might not cause offense, go down to the lake, throw in fishing, catch a fish, open its mouth. There'll be a 4 drachma coin. You take that and go pay, because 2 drachmas is how much you owed for your temple tax. Why is it in there? Why ask that question? And Lee, I'm convinced that the reason it was raised is that Jews who were becoming Christians in the first century, from Pentecost on, for the next 30 years, you had Jews who were becoming Christians. These Jews quit going and sacrificing at the temple because Jesus had been the final sacrifice. So these Jewish Christians, they're not going up and they're not sacrificing goats, they're not sacrificing sheep, they're not sacrificing anything. And so the question becomes one of, do we have to keep paying the temple tax since we don't use the temple anymore? Except to go worship up there. Sure. They did some of that, and then when persecution broke out, they couldn't even do that. And so the Jewish Christians are like, why should we have to pay the temple tax? And Matthew says, let me tell you a story about Jesus. Jesus shouldn't have had to pay the temple tax. But to keep from causing offense, you pay the temple tax.
Sure.
Even though you don't have to. And so Matthew's saying to the Jewish Christians, and by the way, this is proof to me that Matthew's gospel is written before AD 70. Because in AD 70, the temple was completely destroyed and was never rebuilt. So there would have been no temple tax after that. And so for this to even be a question, it means that it had to have been written before AD 70, and I date it to probably early AD 60s myself. And so it was just a fascinating lesson. And by the way, it's a lesson about not causing offense anytime. My best example of that, Lee, is when I'm invited to go to a church, and there's not many of these left, but used to there were a good many of them, and they would, in the invitation they would send you, they would say, and you must use, fill in the blank.
Yeah, King James.
King James. We require preachers to use the King James Version of the Bible. And so, if somebody said to me, would you mind using the King James? No, I don't mind at all. I'll do that. It's not the Bible I use regularly. It's not the one that I preach out of. But if you want me to preach out of the KJV, I can do that. And so to keep from causing offense, I'll be glad to do that. And I think sometimes as Christians, we are free to do a lot of stuff that for the sake of the Christian faith, we don't do.
I mean, if you stop and think about it for a second, if your response had been, well, no, I'm not coming.
If I keep preaching out of my Bible, I'm not coming.
What does that say about the view of evangelism? What does that say about your relationship to fellow Christians? It's not saying that, because you agree to do it, it doesn't mean that you are now saying, oh, well, the King James is the only thing we can use. Instead, it's, hey, this is an opportunity.
Yeah.
this is an opportunity to share the message. I can share the message with the King James just as well as I can share it with any other
Absolutely.
version. And
Absolutely.
and to reject that opportunity, to me, is rejecting the opportunity of being who God wants us to be.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to bring that up. I think that's what's going on. And of course, Peter is involved in this. Matthew seems to be encouraging Jewish Christians, keep paying the temple tax, even though you're no longer under the Mosaic covenant. All right. What's fascinating to me, Lee, is that for at least the next few chapters, basically it's Peter always asking questions.
Yeah.
Mark doesn't record that. Luke usually doesn't record it. But Matthew does for some reason. And it's always Peter the one who's raising his hand. I don't know if you remember back when we were in high school, but there was always that one person who always raised their hands, and it usually wasn't me. Yeah. And, can I ask a question? Peter's the guy who always raises his hands. So let's move to the next one, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Peter came up to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?
And then why 7?
Yeah, well, the rabbis, Jewish rabbis, taught that once you forgave someone 3 times, that was really enough. You really didn't have to do it after that. My personal thought is, well, Peter's thinking, okay, 3 times, all right, if I multiply that by 2, that's 6. Add one more on, that's 7. So I'm in pretty good shape with 7. So I'm kind of thinking he's kind of believing that I'm on a spiritual plane here. Right. That I 7 times. I'm willing to do it 7 times. I mean, rabbis say only 3, but I'll go double that plus 1.
And of course, you think about what in the world's going on in Peter's life that's caused this. Has Andrew short-sheeted him that many times? I mean, has his brother, pulled some kind of trick, and he's like, "You got to be kidding me, Lord! How many times I got to forgive my brother?" And maybe they're literally my brother. Yeah. and so he says, up to 7 times. And I think you're right. I think he's just trying to be padded so that he looks good. And then, of course, Jesus is like, oh, goodness gracious, Peter. And by the way, don't we all do stuff like that, especially when we're younger or when we haven't thought through something? I think back, Lee, and I can't help but think back to when I was a kid, and my parents taught me that I couldn't lie. Lying was wrong, with one exception. Do you remember the exception?
Now, what was your exception?
When your fingers were crossed.
Oh, that one, yes.
Y'all remember that one? You'd sit there and your friend would say, did you tell them about me? And you'd cross your finger and say, oh, no, I didn't tell. And then they'd come back and say, you did too. You lied. No, I didn't have my fingers crossed. You see, when you were 7, 8, 9 years old, if your fingers were crossed, you didn't have to tell the truth. Or, by the way, we were so good at it, if your fingers were crossed, your legs were crossed, and your eyes were crossed.
Yeah.
Any of those, you could tell a lie without being found guilty. Okay?
I mean, if you could do all 3 at once.
You were really good. Yeah. Well, if you did all 3 at once, they'd notice.
Yeah.
In fact, it was so bad in my neighborhood that anytime you'd ask someone to tell the truth, you'd say, let me see your hands, let me see your feet, let me see your eyes. And I don't know anything else you can cross, but anyway, that's what we tried to do. Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times.
Yeah.
So
sure.
Kind of explore that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm sure Peter, when he hears that, is kind of like, oh, here I am again thinking that I'm getting
good
a little bit.
at 7.
I'm good at 7. And Jesus saying, no, you're not. No, you're not. So in other words, not only should one forgive a brother or sister over and over, I think it also implies that you don't keep a record of wrongs. Period. Sometimes it can be really easy for us to say, okay, well, yeah, I forgive. Yeah, I'll forgive, but I don't forget. And then if something happens, we're tempted to pull that back out. Well, I remember when you did, whatever. And
you know that happens probably more in marriage than anywhere. I don't know how many times I've had couples come in for marriage counseling, and I'll go, okay, tell me what's going on. They've been married 20, 30 years, and they'll say, well, 25 years ago, my husband, and I'm like, what? 25 years ago? You still have a record of that? And I try to tell people, okay, I got to ask you a question. Do you love your husband? Or do you love your wife? Because Paul says if you love, what do you not do? You don't keep a record of wrong. You don't get your little book out and say, on this date, June did such and such. Now, we never forget. But if we throw it up, it shows we not only have we not forgotten, we haven't forgiven.
Yeah.
And so when anybody wants to bring up something from 15, 20, 30 years ago, all that tells me is more about you spiritually than about your spouse spiritually. By the way, Genesis 4:24. If this is back from Lamech. Lamech is a descendant of Cain. Okay? He's Cain's like great grandson. 7 generations down.
And a nasty piece of work.
Yes. If Cain is avenged 7 times, Lamech had killed a young man. He went in and said to his 2 wives, I've killed a young man for wounding me. And he says, if Cain is avenged 7 times, Lamech is avenged 77 times. By the way, this is called the law of vengeance. I don't know if you remember, but when I was in high school, one of the stupid things we guys did is we would hit one another on the shoulder.
Yep.
And so whenever you would start that game.
You want to play just now?
No.
No. Okay.
But whenever we'd start playing that game, as soon as you got hit, what did you try to do? Had to hit them harder. And then they would hit you harder. And then you would hit them harder. And eventually one of you is like, okay, time out. This is not, you get bruised up something terrible. Now, some of y'all, I know what you're thinking right now is you people in Mississippi were nuts. We were.
Well, I was in Tennessee. So
did they do it in Tennessee?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, I don't feel so bad then. It's the law of vengeance. I've got to do worse to you than you've done to me. And Jesus says, law of vengeance doesn't work, Peter. You don't keep a record of how many times you've forgiven. By the way, the old King James said 70.
Yeah.
70 times 7.
70 times 7, yeah.
And there used to be a skit at Freed Hardeman of where you'd have these 2 guys arguing up on stage, and one of them would say, oh, please, would you forgive me? And he'd say, yeah, I'll forgive you. And he said, thank you so much. And he walks away, and the guy gets out his book and goes, 400 and,
yeah.
He's getting close to, 490, 488. 2 more, I don't have to forgive him anymore. But that's not the case. Jesus is saying, if you're going to follow me, the law of vengeance is out. It's got to be the law of forgiveness. And by the way, 77 is not to be taken literal.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Comes up next with Jesus tells the parable of the unmerciful servant in response to this question. And if you remember it, it was the one where the servant comes in and he owes his master
10,000 talents.
Yeah, which is millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And the master orders him to be sold, to be put in debtor's prison. And everything he had, his family. And he says to the master, be patient with me, and do you remember what he said to him?
Yeah, I will pay it all.
I'll pay you back completely. Not 10,000 talents. That's like $10 million today. If I owed that much, I'm stuck.
Yeah.
And then what does he do just as soon as the master forgives him? What does he go out and do?
Yeah. Of course, he then goes out, finds a fellow servant who owes him something approximately a month's wages, I believe, and grabs him by the throat. It's not a case of where he's just asking. He grabs him by the throat and
begins to choke him.
Yeah, says, pay me what you owe me. And, of course, the other servant saying, just give me some time. I'll take care of it.
Which he could.
He could.
You pay a month's debt pretty easy.
Yeah. But the first servant pays no attention, has him, thrown into prison. The lesson, he didn't learn the lesson.
Right.
And I think one of the things about this is the fact that his fellow servants saw him. He can't do these things in secret.
Right.
And it's important, I think, it's a reminder to me at least, hey, we're always being watched. People see me, people watch me. How am I reacting? How am I treating other people? And if we're not careful, those things come back to bite us, which it certainly did with the servant.
Yeah. And the point that Jesus is making is that he's forgiven us far more than we have to forgive others. Now, sometimes we have to forgive others some pretty big stuff. Lee, this week on Tuesday, I'll be at River Bend speaking at 2 parole hearings. Both individuals committed murder. And my message will not be a message of overlook the murder. It cannot be. My message has to be a message of, but forgiveness is possible. Now, whether the families of those who have been murdered can forgive, I can't make them forgive.
Mm-hmm.
But learning how to forgive is one of the things, because forgiveness actually, at the end of the day, sets us free.
Sure.
Not the person we forgive.
Yeah, because if you don't forgive, it means you're hanging on to it, which affects your own life. It affects your relationship with others. Certainly it would affect my relationship with God. And I think, I don't know about you, but I know for me, I can find it easier to forgive someone who's done something to me. Far easier than I can forgive someone who's done something to somebody I love.
Yeah.
I mean, that is much more difficult for me personally. Doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. It should, but it's more challenging for me in that regard.
All right, we're going to move now to Peter and the rich young ruler, and this is a question that comes afterwards. So let's run through the text really quick. Jesus is questioned by a rich young ruler. By the way, a ruler is simply the local preacher in the synagogue. Okay? These are called synagogue rulers. We would call them preachers today. So this is the guy who arranges the services. He sometimes speaks. Sometimes he gets other people to speak. But he is in charge. Might be more like head elder than the preacher. But anyway, he's a young man who's already leading a synagogue. And he wants to know how to get eternal life. What must I do to get eternal life? And Jesus responds to his questions, and the ruler responds to Jesus. They talk back and forth with each other, and then the Lord tells him to sell everything he has, give to the poor, and then come to follow him. And what happens to him?
He's sad because he is rich, and
So question: why would Jesus tell him to sell everything?
Because Jesus knows his heart, and he knows that's the thing that's in his way. He's not telling everybody to sell everything. But what he is saying is, whatever it is that's in your life that is keeping you from being, from following me, that's what you need to remove. And of course, as we know, that he went away sorrowful, and
by the way, Jesus was sorrowful.
Yeah.
He looked at him and loved him.
Exactly.
And Jesus was sad, probably more sad than he was, watching a young man who had so much potential, but like you said, couldn't get rid of the idol in his life.
Yeah. And we all have those idols or have had those idols in some way, whether it's riches or power or whatever. We can fill in the blank. But we can't allow those things to be more important than our relationship with God. And that's what he's getting back to him, here. It's kind of interesting, when they're having that conversation and Jesus says, well, do this, do this, do this, do this, and the guy says, well, I've done all that, which is always kind of humorous to me. A little bit. It's like, well,
you shall have no other graven image. You've had that graven image or that coin in your mind for a long time. Yeah. When the young man heard this, he went away sad because he had great wealth. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Truly I tell you, it's hard for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. In fact, I tell you, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God." Now, you would think at that point right there, you go, wow, is it that hard? Well, with God it's possible. Because in Luke's gospel, the very next story after this one is Zacchaeus, who is also a rich man, but who follows Jesus. And so in Luke's gospel, Luke says, yes, the rich young ruler couldn't do it. Zacchaeus did do it. By the way, do you remember what Jesus told Zacchaeus to do? Nothing. Zacchaeus volunteered. Lord, half of everything I have I give to the poor, and if I've defrauded anyone, I'll pay them back 4 times. So Zacchaeus jumps on it. He doesn't have to be told by Jesus. He jumps on it. And so he's an example of someone who could be saved. And then,
Yeah, I mean, as you say, the disciples are like, well, who in the world
now,
can get it done?
let me ask you this question. Why would a rich person being rejected be a shock to Jewish people? What did they see wealth as being?
Well, a lot of them saw wealth as being a supporting of that they are spiritual.
In other words, Abraham was a wealthy man.
And
David was a wealthy man.
And God gave them more
Yeah.
and more. So the idea of being rich means God's blessing them. They sometimes look past the fact that there were some rich people who were pretty evil people.
Which Solomon recognized. He says, I see it all the time. People who are as wicked as could be, and they're wealthy. Yeah. So wealth doesn't mean God's necessarily blessing you. But they thought it did in the first century. First century, that was a common belief. If you're rich, you're blessed. If you're poor, you've sinned.
Yeah.
Well, you remember the man at the pool.
Sure.
Who sinned that this man should be born blind?
Yeah.
Got to be somebody's fault.
Yeah, him, his parents. It had to be one of them that did it.
Yeah.
And of course, exactly how he could have sinned when he was born blind is, what did he do prior to, so.
Yeah. Jesus' response with man, this is impossible. With God, all things are possible. Luke adds a story to it. Matthew doesn't have. But Peter asks a question.
Yeah. So again, Peter's, I think, kind of seeing exactly where things stand and where they stand as far as with their relationship with Jesus and stuff. And he says, we've left everything to follow you. Now, is that completely true? I don't know, but that's certainly
how. At least in his mind,
in his mind, that's the case.
Yeah.
He says, so what's in it for us? And which again is not an unusual question. That's something that I think a lot of us would be tempted to ask that same thing.
Well, if somebody comes and says to any of us, hey, I'm starting a new company, would like for you to get in on the ground floor. Okay, why do I leave the job I'm working at now to come work for you? What's in it for me? That's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, one of the most difficult conversations for preachers is when they go to a church and they meet with elders and they go, okay, what's it going to take to get you here?
Yeah.
Finances. I hate that question. I absolutely hate that question. And so that's one of those questions you're like, man alive, do we have to talk about money? But Peter's, that's the question. Lord, what's in it for us?
Yeah.
And of course, we threw in this question. Is it just Peter, or is he asking it for Andrew and James and John and Philip, Bartholomew, and the rest of the guys? Because they've been arguing over what positions they're going to have. Yeah. They're thinking they're going to have positions of power, which will involve positions of wealth.
Yeah.
And so, okay, Lord, what's in it for us?
Yeah.
And Jesus answers, truly I tell you, at the renewal of all things. Interesting thing here. By the way, the renewal of all things, the Greek word there is palingenesia. It's a compound word. One word, 2 compounds. Palin means again. Anybody know what word we get from Genesia? Genesis. Jesus says, truly I tell you, when Genesis happens again, And you go, okay, I don't understand. Genesis happens again. Turn to Revelation 22. Revelation 22 is the throne of God. River flowing out of the throne like it did in the Garden of Eden. On either side of the river is growing the tree of life. It's Genesis again. And he says, at the renewal, when Genesis is again, when the Son of Man sits on his throne, Revelation 22, 1 and 2, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And of course, you can imagine the apostles going, okay, we're going to be sitting on what?
And we're judging who?
We're sitting on thrones? And one of us is judging Judah, and one's judging Levi, or Simeon, or Naphtali. I mean, you're judging the 12 tribes. Really? Everyone who's left houses or brothers or sisters or fathers or mother or life or children or fields. Now that's leaving everything.
Yeah.
If you've had to leave family, will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first. Kind of that reversal of fortune there. Let me ask you a question, Lee. If someone has had to leave their family, their father and mother, how do they receive 100 times as much?
In some ways.
And you and I haven't discussed this.
No.
So I know I'm throwing a curve
Yeah.
at you.
Yeah, I'm used to that.
Yeah.
So, you know.
You are. You've had to get used to it.
But
let me ask you a question. When you were in Scotland, how many years?
Almost 8.
Almost 8. Who was your family?
Yeah, my family was my church family, and we had. I remember when I moved over there. Moved over there in January of one year, and we got around to Christmas. Christmas was getting, or I was even thinking, even before Christmas, because my parents weren't going to be able to come,
right.
Over and stuff. And I was thinking even well before Christmas, like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do at Christmas time?
You're a missionary and you're not married yet.
I'm not married, and when I'm first thinking this, I don't have a girlfriend, during this time, and at that point, and I'm sitting there thinking, who am I? Where am I going to go? And
it gets kind of lonesome on Christmas Day when you're by yourself.
Yeah, but before we got to that point, I had a family there in the church. I super good friends still with particularly with their son. He and I are about the same age, but his mom, she made it clear to me. She said, "You won't be alone at Christmas, because if you're not with someone, you're going to be with us." I mean, that's just flat out what she told me. Now, the way it turned out, I was blessed to begin dating Joan a little bit earlier than that, and so I went, with her, and her family. But if that hadn't been the case, this other lady, she was basically my adopted mother. I mean, she was my mom while I was over there. Yeah. So that makes sense to me. This, 100 times more. I mean, it's, you're basically never alone as a Christian, because wherever you go, you got family, and that's how it feels to me anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what Jesus is trying to say is the church has always been mine and June's family. Now, we got family back in Mississippi, but my mom and dad have passed. June's mom and dad has passed. My brother and sister are down there, and and I like to see them from time to time. But let's face it, this is our church family, and I want y'all to know that. I mean, I think sometimes we as preachers don't tell you how much you mean to us, because you do mean so much to us. The words of encouragement, the cards we get, the way you treat June. Boy, what a difference that makes in my life. And I know you've experienced the same thing at Jackson Park and Goodlettsville and over in Scotland.
Yep.
Just people being there. And you know, Lee, one of the fascinating things about that is, especially back when I was younger and poorer, I remember one day I'm at the office and my secretary hears the doorbell ring. She goes to the door, she comes back in, and she hands me a card. And I said, "What's this?" And she said, "I don't know. Somebody came to the door and said, 'Give this to Les.'" And I said, "Who was it?" She said, "I've never seen them before." I said, "What were they driving?" She said, "I don't know. I didn't pay attention to what they were driving." And I thought, well, this is odd. Had my name on it. I opened it up. Blank card inside, nothing in it except a $100 bill. And I thought, wow. And so I called June up. And I said, "June, you ain't going to believe what happened. Somebody came by, left an envelope with my name on it, and inside it's a $100 bill." And June said, "Well, it's probably for me." And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa. How'd you get that? You know. But acts of kindness like that, of just little bitty things just to say, listen, we love you.
And since you brought that up, I did want to mention it was me that dropped it off.
Oh, it was you that dropped it off. Okay. Yeah, so. All right. I'm glad to know finally who dropped that off. Okay. And then Peter and the withered fig tree, and our time is going to be up. This, by the way, they've entered into Jerusalem. This is the last week. Peter's fixing to become very prominent.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of conversations going on. Okay? So it's fixing to get real intense, especially the last night. You know, that last night in the upper room, Peter, whoo!
Yeah.
The Peter in Peter comes out.
Yep.
You know, one of the ones I always thought, man, Peter, you did not say that in front of the rest of the apostles. "Lord, even if all of these were to deny you, I'll never deny you." I mean, even his own
brother, yeah.
Even putting Andrew in that camp. I mean, Peter came out that night. This is an interesting story. By the way, just so you know, again, when you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, one of the things, Lee, I do constantly is compare them. Because I want to see, what did Matthew do with it? What did Luke do with it? And why did they do it? Because it's always fascinating. By the way, Luke being the doctor, Luke always, pardon the pun, doctors the text. Okay? You remember the passage a while ago, easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle? Matthew and Mark both put the word for sewing needle. Remember what Luke did?
He put the needle of the
suture needle.
The suture needle.
Yeah, he switches the word. Why? Because Luke's a doctor. As a doctor, he uses suture needle. He doesn't sew. He sutures people up. And so he switches the word. He also comes to the man with leprosy. And Mark said there was a man who had leprosy. And Matthew said, "Oh, no, 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 no. He was covered in leprosy," Luke says. Or Peter's mother-in-law. Matthew and Mark says Peter's mother-in-law had a fever.
High fever.
Luke says she had a high fever. It's 110. Well, maybe not 110, but it was a high fever. And so Luke's always doctoring the text. And you see that. That's what I love about comparing them, is you're looking at it going, oh. Look at Mark. They come in on Palm Sunday. Okay, Palm Sunday. They come in. Jesus takes forever to get there. Takes forever to get from Bethany into the temple. Jesus entered Jerusalem, went to the temple courts. Look at what Mark tells us. He looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. Okay? If you read Matthew and Luke, Jesus comes into Jerusalem, goes straight to the temple, and cleanses it. And you go, what? Mark says that he waited till the next morning, Monday morning. That's correct. He waited Monday morning. You say, then why does Matthew and Luke overlook that? It's not important to their story. Yeah. They don't tell all the details if the details are not pertinent to what they say. That's why you have to compare all three. I've heard so many good preachers. Jesus came in on Sunday, went straight to the temple and cleansed it. And I want to go, no, he didn't. Didn't cleanse it till Monday morning. Went back, slept over it, which might explain why he was a little irritable coming back in.
Yeah.
So, Mark tells us what happens next actually happens on Monday morning. So, Monday morning, they're coming in, and if you don't mind, share the text.
Yeah, so Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say it.
Now, I've highlighted that middle section there.
Yeah,
Mark tells us something that you have to listen to. If you don't, you miss the point. Mark tells us he goes to look for figs on a tree that
it's not time for figs.
it's not time for figs. Now, you got people who say, well, there were these early little figs that would come on, and that's, no. Mark is clear. It's not time for figs. And you go, then why does Jesus curse the tree? That's the question Mark wants you to ask. Has nothing to do with the tree. Has to do with what's fixed to happen in the city. Okay? So he goes into the city, starts throwing over tables, cleanses the temple. And of course, you know, the sad truth is, Lee, it didn't stay cleansed long.
No, they were probably set back up the next day doing what they've been doing.
Yeah. But what he's doing here, y'all, is what we call a miracle parable. The miracle's not the story. If you focus on the miracle, you miss the story. It's the parable he's trying to say. Mark's statement that it was not the season for figs is Mark's way of saying something else is going on. And what seems likely is that Mark is pointing to something else that carries far more importance. Lee, he's going into the temple to look for fruit.
Yeah.
But Israel,
it's just not there, you know, and particularly among its leaders, the ones who should be providing fruit for the people.
And not only is, you know, the temple should be the place where these blessings flow.
Yeah.
And what are they doing in the temple?
Yeah,
They're people.
Yeah, they're cheating people.
They're cheating people. They're robbing people. And so the point of the tree is to say, sometimes there should be fruit there. In the case of Israel, there should be fruit there. And there's no fruit there. And what Jesus does is curses it. And notice there, man, he goes in and he's hot.
Yeah.
He'd go, again, remember, he went into the temple Sunday afternoon. It's almost dark. He looks around. What do you think he's seeing?
He's seeing red, is what, you know.
Money changers over here stealing. People over here selling sheep for twice as much as they should. People over here lying. I mean, it is nothing but a den of thieves.
And if you bring an animal in that's perfectly good, they're going to say, "Oh no, that animal's not good. You need to get one of our animals, and we're going to charge you more for it." That animal isn't, you know, what you brought, even though it's perfectly good, it's really not.
It's not good because you're going to have to buy. You're exactly right. They were scamming the people. Jesus goes out Sunday night. Let me ask you a question. You think he slept any? I mean, he had just gone into his father's house. And Thomas, he is absolutely furious. And he goes back to Bethany, probably Mary, Martha, and Lazarus' house. And I think he probably rolled and tumbled all night. And he gets up the next morning, and as he's walking in, he curses that fig tree. And then he goes in, and he overthrows all of them. And then look at the evening. When evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. In the morning, as they went along, which is Tuesday morning, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots.
Yep.
And Peter's response?
Yeah. He says, "Look, you know, what you cursed, it's withered. You know what? You know, it's just all of a sudden,
it's gone.
It's gone.
Dead as a hammer.
I mean, it is gone. Now, is he and the disciples catching on what exactly is going on? No.
Not yet.
No, it's still taking some time.
And our time is up, but let me go to the last thing. Have faith in God, Jesus answered. Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, don't miss that. Where was the temple built? Mount Zion, the most important mountain in the world. Jesus says, if you have faith, you can say to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and you don't doubt it in your hearts, but believe, then it will happen. It is important to remember that what is asked in accordance with God's will, but not to fulfill our own desires. That's not in the text. That's an addition there. Jesus is pronouncing judgment on the temple. And he said, guys, if you believe, this mountain is going to be cast into the sea. Not literally, but it's going to be destroyed. And by the way, the next day, as they're coming out, we'll get to this next. Look at these beautiful stones of this temple. Jesus says, you see this temple built on this mountain? Not one stone is going to be left on the next. Whoa. We'll get to that next week.
Yep.
How about leading us in prayer?
Sure. God, we do thank you for this day. Beautiful weather today. We're reminded of the wonders of your creation, and we're thankful for the opportunity of being here this morning, of continuing our look at the life of Peter, of the things that we learn from him. Sometimes we learn from his mistakes, but we recognize that we also make many mistakes. And we also see what Peter became, and it reminds us of what we can become. Help us to keep our trust and our confidence in you. We think of those who are dealing with various challenges or struggles right now, whether physically or emotionally or spiritually. We just ask a blessing on each one. Those that we each have people in our families or close friends who are dealing with these things, and we ask a blessing on them. We pray that the circumstances, particularly in other parts of this world where so much war is going on, that peace can come back, that those who are striving to bring as much evil about as possible will be defeated in their efforts. And we pray for our country to encourage people to look back to you for answers, to look to you for guidance. Because when we look in other places, we're not going to find the answers that we need.